Okay, well, good morning, Carl,
Hi.
and welcome. This is our ACSM's Distinguished Leaders in Sports Medicine and Exercise Science series, and you were certainly one of the people we wanted to talk to. You're going to be getting an award tonight, and you've been president of the group in, what was it, 2005 and 6 maybe?
05, 06 was my year.
In there. And so what we wanted to start with was just a little bit about what you're doing now in your college and your training and how you got there.
Okay.
And then eventually I want to talk a little bit more about how you got involved with the American College of Sports Medicine.
Okay. Well, right now I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse in the Department of Exercise and Sports Science. One of the original training programs for master's students in clinical exercise physiology was created at La Crosse essentially by Phil Wilson. When he retired, I replaced him about 11 years ago. And with John Procari, who leads the program, I'm sort of the other senior person that makes that program happen. I came there from Sinai Samaritan Medical Center in Milwaukee, which is a teaching hospital for University of Wisconsin. And I'd been there for 21 years, basically doing research and then later running the cardiac rehab program. And when Mike Pollock had gone there to essentially invent cardiac rehab as we know it today,
Yes.
I was the one that went in to run his research lab.
Oh, wow.
And then when Neil Aldridge replaced him as my boss, I got more involved in the cardiac rehab, and after Neil left, I did it all for about a decade.
Okay. Wow. So is your program undergrads then?
No,
what level of?
The main program I'm involved in is a master's level program.
Okay.
It's unique. It's only 1 year on campus, but it includes the thesis, and then they have to do an internship. But UW-La Crosse is in that industry sort of like Harvard. It's the place you go. It's the first
Yeah,
big
I've heard
place.
a lot about it.
And probably a third of the past presidents of AACVPR have had La Crosse connections.
And what does that stand for?
That's the American Association of Cardiovascular and Pulmonary Rehab, which is a competitive organization.
Is that what Barry does? Barry Franklin?
Barry does cardiac rehab. He's also a past president of that society, as he is of this one. John Procari, who's my main colleague on a day-to-day basis, is a past president of AACVPR.
Oh, gee.
And lots of people cross over both organizations professionally.
Yeah. What's the career like for graduates of that type?
If our students are geographically mobile, they get placed pretty quickly. It's a funny career. You get about 5 years of normal work taking care of patients, and then it gets a little bit routine, and you see them sort of dividing themselves. The field is dominated by younger women who very often make the decision to do the family thing, and the career becomes a part-time career.
Yeah.
About at the same time, a lot of people decide they want a little bit more, so they go back for nursing school or go to physician assistant school. A certain number of them sort of get sucked into hospital administration, and because the money's better and the career possibilities are better.
Well, what kind of an undergrad preparation then would these people need?
Well, for example, a lot of them, we usually get 15 new students a year. About 4 to 6 of them a year could come out of our own undergraduate exercise and sports science program, the fitness emphasis, where we've trained people to work with people in gymnasiums or in clubs, because fundamentally the same skill, whether you're working in a gym or a club or a cardiac rehab unit, you're still taking a person saying, where are they at physically, what would I like to change? In the case of patients, it's a little more complicated because they're sick people, and you do it wrong, then you have a bad outcome. But the fundamental skill set and the mindset is the same.
So what classes do you teach then?
I teach an undergraduate exercise physiology class in the undergraduate program, and then I teach graduate courses in lab methods, research methods, and then I have a course on sort of the philosophy of rehabilitation. And then because we require a thesis, and I'm probably the most research-oriented of the faculty there, I probably carry 8 to 10 of the theses each year.
That's a tremendous amount of work.
Well, the thesis stuff worked out well for me because I'm, I guess selfish is not the right word, but I'm creatively selfish. At that point, students don't usually have good projects of their own. And I'm reasonably good at making projects bite-sized
I see.
and asking small science questions.
Yeah.
And so I come in and give them a list of things that I am interested in and say, if you want to work with me, pick one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the same time, you sit down literally every night and pray that if Albert Einstein walks in and asks the totally brilliant, stupid question, that he recognizes that brilliance is happening.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there aren't too many Albert Einsteins walking around.
That's true. Well, that's I mean, all this in a year. That's a jam-packed year. Right?
It's a very, very busy year for them.
Yeah.
And but it's good. Well, we usually get out of the thesis projects because of the timing. They typically go to AACVPR because they finish their projects around April, which is their abstract deadlines for the Cardiac Rehab Society.
Okay.
But we usually get 6 to 8 of the 15 theses presented there.
Oh, wow.
This year, for example, 3 of the 6 finalists in the Beginning Investigator Awards are our students.
Fantastic. So they've already had their research in line and have been working on
Yeah.
it by the time the abstract is
Yeah.
ready.
Yeah.
By the time the meeting,
Yeah.
they're ready to go,
Yeah.
basically.
In fact, when I show up at home after ACSM, that's the first day our new students come in.
Okay.
And about 2 weeks later, after they go through some orientation, I start teaching a research methods class this summer.
Mm-hmm.
And outside of giving them information, they basically pick a topic, do the preliminary review of the literature,
Okay.
do the preliminary stuff for IRB and for funding. And so, but by the fall, though, they're almost ready to go to the laboratory.
So they're starting right away.
They are
basically.
doing that.
I mean, you would have to get all this done
Yeah.
in a year. Well, you named Mike Pollock, Neil
Yeah.
Aldridge,
Yeah.
a lot of people. Was that how you got involved with ACSM?
Well, ACSM, I guess I should go back. My life's a little serendipitous. I do stupid things and land on my feet. When I finished undergraduate school in biology, I couldn't get into medical school.
Mm-hmm.
I was living in Texas, and I was not a very good runner, so I decided I'd just go to Texas, Austin,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a nice place, and Jack Daniels was down there. And he was studying runners, and I thought, wow, this is neat. So I showed up on the doorstep in
When was this?
1970.
Okay.
And it turned out that I got in, and Jack and I were a perfect mix. And so I went and did that sort of thing.
Was this a master? You were
That
working
was
on
my
a
master's, yeah.
Okay.
And then I did my doctorate as well there. But interestingly, Jack had been one of Bruno Balke's students.
Oh, okay.
So the family tree sort of began then.
Yes.
And then at the end of my doctoral work, I had asked Dave Costel to come down and do some biopsies for us,
Mhm.
because he was in the middle of doing that then.
Mm-hmm.
Just as I was finishing my dissertation, Dave got a grant to do some work with diabetics. It's actually a grant, the idea of which was one of his students, a fellow named Bill Evans. But so again, by historical accident, one of Dave's students came up with an NIH grant.
Oh.
Dave got the grant. He called me up and said, "Would you like to come to Ball State?"
And this is basically a postdoc.
It was a postdoc, yeah.
Wow.
When I'd been looking for jobs, I had written to Mike Pollock, and then during the year I was at Dave's, Mike Pollock came up for a visit. I met him sometime at the late part of that year. Mike left the Cooper Institute to move up to Milwaukee. He needed a research person, so he calls me up. So an awful lot of these are pure accidents.
Yeah.
And then even later in Milwaukee, after I'd been running the program for a number of years on my own, the docs decided they wanted to go into private practice. And so suddenly I was looking for a job. Phil Wilson was leaving La Crosse at just that moment. And so the door was open
And
for me
Phil
to go there.
had been associated with ACSM as well.
Yeah, he's a past president of AACVPR, was
As well,
extremely
yeah.
involved in the ACSM certification
Yes.
world.
Yeah, yeah. And then that's when you got to La Crosse.
La Crosse, and I'm getting ready to begin my 12th year there.
So you got there when?
I went there in 1998.
Okay, okay. And what was your first ACSM meeting? Do you remember?
It was Nashville in 1974, and I slept on Ed Halley's floor in his house because Ed was also a student of Bruno Balke's and had been a classmate of Jack Daniels. And Jack went to the meeting and said, let's go up. But we didn't have any funding, so since his classmate lived in town, we slept on his floor.
Okay.
And since then, I think I've only missed one meeting since 1974. The year my oldest son was born, the timing was a little bit tight, so my wife said, no, this is not one you're traveling to.
I understand. Well, so what else? You eventually became president of the college, and do you remember going back, some of the other things that you had gotten involved with the college earlier than that, and different things that you've done, and the influence the college had in your career?
Well, number one, almost from the beginning, it was sort of a kid in a candy store kind of thing, in the sense that I really responded to the science. And it's this new stuff you're seeing, and anybody who goes this path has a lot of curiosity and likes data and likes ideas. And it was suddenly like, wow, this is
here it is.
Here.
Yeah.
And particularly in the early days, ACSM was a little more bite-sized in terms of a new student coming in. Right now it's a big meeting, and for the young people coming in, it's probably a little overwhelming. But for me, it wasn't really that bad. So the first 3 or 4 meetings I went to were just, okay, well, you got to get your science out, that's what you do. And at the same time, you have science and you're meeting science. And then one of these serendipitous things, when I went to Dave Costel's place, Dave was right in his own presidential cycle. And so you sort of get to meet a few people who you wouldn't ordinarily meet because Dave's the boss. After I left Dave, I went to work for Mike Pollock. Mike Pollock was entering his presidential cycle. And then, as sort of one of those things you do for your underlings, Mike arranged that I was on I guess it was the Continuing Education Committee with Bob Surfass, who was at the University of Minnesota. And so probably earlier than a lot of people, I had a door open in front of me.
So you run a committee already.
Yeah. And then when Bob rotated off, somebody liked me and they asked me to chair it. Yeah, I didn't know what I was doing, but a door had been open, and I guess I must have done okay. So once you do that, you sort of have a possibility. And then somewhere in that period, again toward the end of Mike's tenure, they asked me to run for the board. I was very young for the board.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, just as fine, I'll run for the board. And I didn't expect to win, and I did. And then I served on the board, and I had not even finished my board. I'd only finished the second year. And Carl Gisolfi calls up one day and said, would you run for vice president?
Oh, gee.
And I said,
when was this, Carl?
This must have been
been
in the early 80s.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe 85.
Okay.
And I said to him, aren't I a little young to be a vice president? And he said, well, yeah, but we don't have anybody else to run right now. And I said, okay, I'll run. I'm not going to win anyway. Well, then I did. And that was sort of interesting because I was really sort of young for a vice president. But then you finish, and what are you going to do now?
Yeah.
Because I was way too young to be a president. And they didn't have sort of the automatic bias that they do now to try to run the vice presidents against each other. They don't run every vice president against each other, but there's a bias to do that kind of thing. And so I was sort of lurching around for something to do. Peter Raven, who at another part of his own career had worked with Mike Pollock, so this family tree grows together.
Yeah.
He had gone off to be editor-in-chief of MSSE. And so he asked if I'd like to be an associate editor. And I wound up doing that for 15 years.
Oh, gee. I didn't know that or remember it. I didn't know you had done that.
Yeah. And it was far and away the most favorite thing I did. And for some reason, I was sort of like the little kid Mikey when the TV commercial a few years ago, give it to Mikey.
Likes it.
He'll eat it.
Yeah.
Because I'm one of the last generalists scientifically. I'm interested in a lot of things.
So you could review a lot of manuscripts.
And so if the other specialist associate editors didn't have it, I wound up with it. So I wound up doing an enormous number of manuscripts. But to me, it was a lot of fun. And a lot of the friends I have now are people I met doing that.
Oh,
and so I was happily minding my business doing that. And I would have probably still been associate editor. But then Susan Hall, who was a vice president with Gay Israel, would have been the normal presidential candidate, but she was at a point where she didn't want to run. So they called me up and say, "Would you, we have to have a former vice president run for president-elect. Would you run?" And I said, "Geez, it's been a long time." And Gay Israel is so well prepared. He had served all the right committees and chaired for ACSM. He's extremely administratively organized guy, and I thought, okay, this is a safe bet. There's no chance I'm going to win against that guy.
I was going to ask you who you ran against, and I remember now.
And then for some reason I won the election, and I remember I was actually over in the Netherlands at Joost de Koning's laboratory when Bill Roberts called me up, and I had no you sort of want to win because your ego gets involved, but I didn't think I had a chance at all. And Bill called me up and said, "Well, congratulations, you won." I sat there and I looked at Yost for about 10 minutes with my mouth open, like, what do I do with my life now?
When you were doing the manuscript reviews, were they blind reviews at that time?
No, they weren't.
They weren't. Are they now?
haven't been associate editor in 5 years. I think they're still open reviews.
Are they? I wasn't sure either.
Yeah. And I actually, there's debates either way about that. I think it's better to know who you're reviewing. You want to make sure that the process is above board. But that's the associate editor's job, is to make sure it's a collegial, fair thing, and if somebody's got an issue on a personal level, that they're aware of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But by the same token, if I review one of Barry Franklin's manuscripts, I know it's well done, and so I look at the question differently. If it's somebody who I don't know and I'm not sure of their quality control in their lab, I look at a manuscript a little differently, and I'm not as much interested in the broad question as I am in their methodology. But by the same token, the associate editors are really just traffic cops, because they don't really do the reviews themselves. They ship them out to
the
expert
right
reviewers.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the expert reviewers don't agree. You have to make a decision. But it was, for me, it was a tremendously interesting thing to do.
Well, the journal has had such a high reputation for a long time. So somebody's doing something right along the way.
And I was really fortunate, because when Raven took over as editor, it was a very good journal, and he made it a very good international journal. And that was really the point in history when ACSM sort of made the leap out of North America. And we had a lot of tradition, Buskirk and Balke and Tipton had all done excellent work, but it was still effectively a North American journal. And just at that point in history, it exploded out. And we used to get into sort of arguments amongst the editorial staff about how much copy editing do you do for a non-North American whose English might be. And my view was always, you got to look at the science. You can always clean up the language, because if I was sending something to an Israeli journal, my Hebrew's not very good, so I might send great science, but it sounds stupid. But some people had the viewpoint, well, if they're not able to write English well, then this is an English language journal, we should reject it. And to me, that was...
Yeah, because you're losing out on the science piece.
You're losing on the big science.
Yeah.
And I think that was sort of went hand in glove with the fact that ACSM was sort of internationalizing in that period of time. And if you look at this meeting, I think easily a third of the people are non-North Americans at the meeting, and probably there's a higher percentage of presenters that are non-North American than that.
I didn't go to the international reception last night, and that's usually a good indicator of
it was a big reception. It was crowded, lots of people.
Yeah.
And I hang out with internationals a lot, but most of my close colleagues are internationals, and there were a lot of people at that meeting I'd never seen, which to me is good, because it tells you that you're getting some fresh blood into the system.
Yes. And yesterday at the business meeting, I guess you were there. They voted to have the 3 international representatives on the board, which everybody was pretty much in favor of. Well, sort of a final thing, where, you know, you've been with the college a long time and have been associated with a long time. Where do you see the college sort of now,
Yeah.
and where we may be going in the future, and any ideas about good things, bad things? A lot of debate about that, really. Is it too big? Or?
I think we're going in the right direction. B, I think growth is natural. Every organization aspires to growth, and we've done that. Although the membership has been comparatively flat for almost a decade now. And so we may have reached our sort of natural size of
roughly 20,000.
20,000. If you look at doctoral level people who are sort of regular members, it's probably in the 11 to 12,000, and that's been a stable number.
Mm-hmm.
And
sort of the core,
yeah.
And then it's been up and down.
But until about 15 or 20 years ago, when Whitehead showed up, ACSM was this nice little sort of sleepy scientific society, and you figure societies, their job is to have a meeting to get their members together and to publish a journal to share information. That's job one and job two. Mm-hmm. And we've been doing that since 1954 pretty effectively.
Long time.
And then sometime about the time Jim Whitehead showed up, began to say, well, what else could journals do, or what else could a society's collective voice do? Mm-hmm. And that's essentially what a society is. Mm-hmm. And he began to say, can we move in the policy direction?
Yes.
And he was saying that even when he first came in, and people were shaking their heads, and there's still some people that don't really understand that movement, but you can do things as a group that I can't do as a scientist. Mm-hmm. You can do things as a group that I can't do as a teacher. Yeah. And so that's why you band together as groups. And the way our country works now, a lot of things happen in Washington. A lot of things happen in terms of policy. The only dark side is if it dilutes the scientific and educational mission, then there's a balance. And in fact, at the business meeting yesterday, some of the questions were, are you shortchanging the students? Is the science good enough? Because the policy piece is clearly growing.
Yes.
And there's always going to be a debate and a tug and pull over which of these sorts of things has precedence at any particular time. Mm-hmm. We're at a point in history where the Obama administration has come in, so you have a more liberal national government. You sort of have a lot of energy in terms of how people are relating to Washington that hasn't been there for the last 8 years. And so the possibility of going to sort of a more policy-oriented piece is always there. Mm-hmm. But by the same token, at its guts, every society is you share information and you publish a journal. ACSM is unique in the sense that there are three clearly disparate sort of constituencies: the physicians, the basic scientists, and the applied scientists / educators.
Yes.
And so you always have with that group have a dance about, well, how much of the program do we get? How much of the journal do we get? Mm-hmm. But it's a dance. It's an ongoing evolution.
Yeah, it seems that they've worked that out fairly well over the years.
It's a continuing work.
I can imagine with the program and all that.
Yeah, and the program, when I was an officer, I served on the program committee. I'm actually now rotating back on it. And there's always a lot of friendly rivalry, I guess is the nice, polite way to say it, in the program committee is what we think we deserve more. Yeah. And so, but again, it's just a battle you fight amongst the people. They're all reasonable folks. Mm-hmm. And there's some steam that gets released, but the program always comes out good. Yeah,
the programs are usually outstanding.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't realize what they've started with, though, and how many submissions there were.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, when I was doing it, the whole thing was, if I could have your paper there.
Yeah.
The big paper. The whole program was something folded like this.
Yeah, I remember.
And it was about 25 pages thick.
Yeah.
And that was all of it didn't have the abstracts in it, but it had, and the abstracts weren't even a full supplement of MSSE. There were maybe 200 abstracts in 1974.
Yeah.
And now there's 2,500 or 3,000 or something like that.
It's thick.
And I'm getting my exercise just lugging the thing around.
Right.
But growth is good. Yeah. And sometimes you get things in there you don't want, but then that's self-correcting.
Yeah, I've heard that similar response from a lot of people at this at this meeting about has the policy gone too far? And I think the bottom line is you need science to make policy. So I think they're in a period of readjusting that again. But.
You see, they also went through a practical thing about 12 or 15 years ago. They decided to accept abstracts that fellows recommended, because the process of reviewing and organizing a formal review process for abstracts, where you had very high acceptance rates anyway, and you were getting this accelerating number of abstracts, and that was probably in the range when we were around 1,500, was just becoming onerous and expensive and so forth. And so it was an active decision to say, well, if a fellow will sign off, we'll accept the abstract. Well, there's some fellows that don't think this fellow is that smart, so they fuss if they don't like this. But again, that's one of these self-correcting things that you go through.
Well, Carl, we're sort of out of time, so thank you so much for coming and talking this morning. And it was a joy to talk and learn all this history that I heard about but didn't know about.
Excellent.
So thank you.